Okay, now we're going to go into the panel portion of the discussion with all three of our all-stars here. This has been an all-star cast. Father is going to explain kind of the ground rules of this, but let me tell you one thing. These are people, all three of these, who executives pay big bucks to consult with for 15 or 30 minutes, and for 39 bucks, you could not only get to consult with one, but all three. So take advantage of this, and Father will give you the ground rules.
Sure, if you want to have a seat right here. And I'll invite our other speakers to come up, take a seat up here on the dais. And let's give a hand to Mr. Kramer here for wonderful. Just while they situate themselves, I've been the director of the Integritas Institute here for the last 2 years. It's been a great privilege and pleasure. I am a Jesuit, and it seems like our silent retreats actually do have some effect on the people we're leading them to, so we're very edified and pleased to hear that. But coming on board is Dr. Al Schorsch, who is currently an associate dean in the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs. He'll be taking charge of the Integritas Institute over the summer. He has a long and storied history. He's been on our board of advisors for many years, has training both in psychology and has been an entrepreneur himself. He had a realty company here in the city and was the director of the Reynolds Hillenbrand Institute at Niles College. So I just want to recognize his presence here, and after this I can hand the whole thing over to him, so I'm very gratified, of course, to see him here. So the ground rules for this are simply that our MC, Dan Chile, is going to field the questions from the floor. If you'd wait till you get a microphone for your question, because we're recording this, we'll get a microphone to you. And the panel each here can address the questions. And we'll take, 20 to 30 minutes and see how the conversation is going. And we're grateful for your expertise. Thank you.
Let me exercise the MC's prerogative here. I want to ask a question to Joan. I want to start out with Joan because she's the one that sees when the things don't go well. But I want this to go around the panel. What do you all see as one of the biggest challenges in the real world, in our modern world, to conducting an ethical business life? And what do you see as the best antidote, the best solution to those difficulties that you see? Why don't you start with Joan, if you would?
Thank you, Dan. The biggest challenge that I see in the work environment, unfortunately, is the deterioration of ethics and ethical values. And compromise was mentioned before, and that's what I see, and that's why I get involved on the back end when ethics have been compromised, fraud has been committed. So I see that as a challenge. Now, how do we fix that? How do we prevent that from happening? And I think it has to happen early on. I talked a little bit in my presentation about where you learn ethics. You learn them from your parents. You learn them from your community, from your teachers, from your faith or religion. So it really has to start early on. That foundation of ethics has to be taught, and hopefully you don't depart from the way that you've been taught, and you maintain your ethics in the work environment.
Jeff, what do you say?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's right. One of the things that disturbed me a little bit in the last 15 years or so is, we had to put compliance groups together, inside the company, and a lot of it, no matter how hard you work at kind of, talking to people about the values and the ethics of the company and the things we do and we want to make sure that we support, there's always somebody thinking a little bit differently and maybe behaving a little bit differently. And I think the key when that happens is how swiftly companies today, okay, because everything's public, everything's out in the open, how swiftly many companies today are dealing with violations on compliance, okay, I think is very, very good. Now you've got to create an environment where people, you know, are comfortable, where they're kind of talking about some things they see in the business today that aren't, you know, that aren't quite right. And then you've got to have, you know, some special people that can take a look in those things and then make the right decisions about how we move forward. But I find that when we do that, we send a very, very strong message about the ethics and the values and the morals of the company and what we will accept and what we don't. And if you've got people that begin to compromise, as Joan said, on those kind of things, that can become very problematic inside a company very, very quickly.
Harry, why don't you weigh in on this?
Well, I think my colleagues have summed it up very well. If I personalize this, when I think about a lot of the things that we read about and some of these horrific things and fraudulent activities, I actually think an awful lot of it is when a person or people in an organization start to believe that their identity is the job. Because if once you become the job, then when something goes wrong and you may need to come out of the job, you end up doing things no ordinary person would do because your whole identity is wrapped up in that job. As opposed to if it's, you know, hey, I'm Harry, I have 5 children, I live in Wilmette, and oh, by the way, I happen to work at Baxter. But if you are, I'm the CEO of Baxter, and that's your identity, people will start to do very, very strange things, right? That's why in some of these companies, I think you could have easily a chief financial officer, I'm sure Joan's seen this, chief financial officer comes into the CEO and says, hey, I got really bad news. You know, we're not going to make the number, and we're going to have to report the fact we're going to miss the number. And instead of saying, hey, okay, that's why they call it work, let's figure it out, we'll explain, we'll do the best we can. Well, no, that can't happen. You know, you better figure out what you're going to do because not hitting the number, that cannot happen. So I actually believe people, because of a lack of ethics, because they forget who they are and they allow themselves to become identity, they end up doing some very, very scary things.
You notice, folks, the common thread here is that not to be a one-dimensional. Go ahead, yes,
if I could,
Jeff.
I want to really support what Harry just said, because I think the way that some of our best leaders have kind of talked about that inside our company at the time was, don't ever let the job define you, okay? The job should not define you, okay? You define yourself, exactly. Okay? You make the choices that you know are right based off your faith, your values, and what you bring to the table. Because when the job begins to define you, when the job goes away, all right, what are you left with? You know, you're left with a wreck, all right, and it becomes very problematic very, very quickly. And you bring that wreck to your next job. You know, it doesn't go away. It stays with you because you got that chip on your shoulder. And you're not going in with a clean, clear conscience about what's right and what's wrong. So I'd be very, very careful of that.
Well said.
And
well said.
If I could just add something, Dan,
Please.
to what both of my colleagues have said. The job defining you, part of that job is the salary or the compensation. And this goes back from this morning's presentation about the fraud triangle. Because as a CEO, you're compensated, you get a salary, but you also get bonuses, you get stock options, and when you don't meet that Wall Street number, then that's pressure. That's financial pressure, that's work-related pressure, and that's one of the elements of the fraud triangle that you have to be very careful of. And when you're that CEO, you definitely have the opportunity because you're the one who's making the decision. And be careful about rationalizing, well, the company's always met the numbers and we're not going to not meet the numbers on my watch.
You know, there's an old concept that we used to have here in the West called honor, where certain things you just don't do because they're just not right. And it makes me think of my Italian grandfather. He always made wine, but during Prohibition, he didn't make wine because it was against the law. And actually, where we lived, the mafia came up to him and said, Dave, we know you know how to make wine. Why don't you make some for us? We'll pay you big bucks. He said, get out of here. He goes, I'm an American citizen. I'm glad to be an American citizen. I'm not going to disobey the law of the country that I've come to love. And so he didn't make any money during the Depression, But on the other hand, he lived with honor, and I think he passed it on to his children, and the world's a little bit better place because of him. Who else has got some questions? Yes, sir.
How are you guys doing? My name is Robin. Do you guys have any additional daily success habits for anyone from networking to reading? And additionally, do you guys have any advice for meeting any goal that a person might have?
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch that.
My first question was, do you guys have any additional daily success habits from networking with people to reading? And additionally, do you guys have any advice for people meeting any goal in general, basically?
Okay, yeah, he wants to know, what are some of the steps that people can take to build up the kind of virtues needed for the things that you advocate? Joan, I'm going to throw it to you again, and it's being right in the middle there.
I'm ready. Well, I have a formula that I've always used. I used this throughout high school, I've used it throughout college, and my daily life as well. And that formula for achieving goals is set your goal, plan your work, and work your plan. This is based on a quote from Norman Vincent Peale: plan your work for today and every day, then work your plan. So first of all, you have to know what you want to do. You have to know your personal why. I teach the CPA review course, and I always ask my students, why do you want to be a CPA? Is it because your parents want you to be a CPA? Is it because you want to get a promotion at work? Is it because you want to get a job as a CPA? Why? You have to know your own personal why. And then you start mapping out how you're going to get there. That's your plan. You put your plan together, and then you take that action that Harry was talking about, and you execute that plan. You work your plan. For goal setting, I would say set your goal, plan your work, and work your plan. Also, as far as success goes, I think one question to ask, and I actually learned this from John Maxwell, he's a leadership guru, and that is, who do you know that I need to know? And Harry mentioned this. He said, I don't know everything, but I know people who know what I don't know. And I think that's part of the networking that you were talking about, Robin. And you need to be able to reach out to people, to connect with people and say, who should I know? Because that's how you build your network.
So, Jeff, you want to weigh in on what are some good habits that people can build up to get to this kind of talent?
I think Joan said it right, and Harry's teaching on this today I thought was great. I'm retired now, so it's a little different, all right? But I'm not finding that I'm, I got a lot to do, all right? So, I had this great job with this great company for 40 plus years, okay, that I loved going to every single day, all right? So the biggest fear that everyone outside of me had is, what the hell is this guy going to do with his time? Okay, what's he going to do? All right? And I'm not finding, okay, that I'm having any problem with that at all, because I've made choices like what Joan was talking about and Harry's talked about where I want to spend my time. And I find myself, even today now, I can do whatever I want during the day. But I'm writing things down all the time. And it might be things for my family. It might be things for Old St. Pat's, because I'm pretty active there. I'm building a new home, okay, in a second location. I've got a lot going on with that. Certain things are going on in the family dynamics that, you have to manage. And I'm trying to stay in touch with the people that, kind of knew what I didn't know, all right, as Joan was talking about, and making sure I don't lose touch with the people that really meant a lot to me, okay, at McDonald's and in that sphere of influence. Whether it's the supplier group that did a great job for me for a lot of years, or whether it's, our field leadership or whatever that might be. And, I find it really refreshing to kind of sit down at 4 o'clock and just, do my reflection, as what Harry said, and I feel really good about that. I look forward to my wife coming home and meeting me for dinner, You know, those type of things, because we've got a lot to talk about, because she's still in the work environment. She's going through some tough things, you know, with her people and that type of thing. So I'm like still really excited every day, but I'm still focusing on listening, on learning every day, all right, and then making the decisions that are right for the sphere of influence that I have in my life today. And it's changed dramatically. It's changed dramatically. And I've got, you know, I'm coming up with some, you know, I'm coming up against some choices. You know, things like, do I want to get back into the work environment? All right, and if I do, this is the level I want to be at. And these are the people that I'd like, you know, to work with that I think I could help. Or do I want to consider the board positions, you know, that might come in front of me today and just do that? Or do I want to do nothing? You know, do I want to go play golf? You know, but I don't think I can play golf every day. You know, I don't think that's going to happen. So there's a lot of that going on, and you've got to sort through that and be organized in your thoughts on that every single day. I don't care if you're working or you're not. You've got to be organized, and you've got to stay focused on the things that are most important, all right? But if I don't write it down, I'm one of those guys. I have to write it down, because at the end of the day, I'm taking a census every single day of what I've accomplished that day. Okay? And if I've done the things and done them right that I said I was going to do, that's just been my makeup. So, and it hasn't changed since I retired. So.
Well, here you've given us a lot of good insights. Where somebody's sitting there and saying, well, wait a minute, I don't do any of these things. Where do I start? How would you prioritize it? And how would somebody first start doing the things that you've recommended, and which ones should come first? In order, in chronological order.
Yeah, so I think, Robin, the first thing I would start to try to do is get a little time off by yourself, the way my colleagues mentioned, and start to just think a little bit about what really does matter to you. When you take a look at your life now and you think 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out, what are the things you think are really going to matter? And even though you may not know, well, will it be this job or that? Will I do this or that? What really do you think has most importance to you? You know, this is a rhetorical question, but is it family? Is it your faith? Is it, you know, that you, how important is the job? How important is it that you'd want to be in a job where you're traveling? What really matters and why? And you start off slow and you start thinking about it. And then to the extent that you can find a couple like-minded people, you know, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a sibling, somebody who you can kind of talk this through with, that'll kind of help you on that process. That's one piece. And another practical thing, very practical, I and my colleagues have suggested this as well, I'm a great believer in the more people you interact with, the more people you get opinions on, focus on, so on, the better off you're going to be. The more, the better. I often tease folks, I think I can learn something valuable from every single person I interact with. You know, I use the example when I fly into New York to LaGuardia Airport and I get in a cab to go to Midtown, before that cab is more than 4 or 5 blocks on its way to Midtown, I'm always in a pretty good discussion with the cab driver, asking a couple questions, trading some ideas. And some people say to me, wait a minute, the guy's driving a cab at LaGuardia Airport. I always tease everybody, I don't know why, but it seems like about 50% of the cabs I get into, the man or woman driving the cab is working on a PhD in something at Columbia or NYU. I've learned more from these cab drivers than I ever read from the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. You can learn something from every single person. So some people, by the way, and again, there's no right or wrong in this. Some people say, oh, I need to find a mentor. I want to find 1 or 2 people. And if you happen to find that person, great. I've always been of the view, I want to interact with hundreds of people. Or the more ideas I get, the more I'm going to better shape what are my priorities, what are my values, what do I want to do. That's the way I think about it.
Other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bill. I've been teaching in the College of Business since 1998. I teach business writing and leadership. I'd like to give you a quote and then ask each of you to answer a question. Never allow 24 hours to pass between books. So in addition to, Harry, your book on action values-based leadership, what are 3 books if you can name 3, or can you limit it to 3, what are 3 books that every undergraduate business student should read before he leaves this university?
Did you get that? Did you hear that? He asked, what are 3 books that you would recommend to undergraduates that they should be an essential part of their education, that they should definitely do this? I think he directed first to you, Harry.
Okay, well, thank goodness I always start off with self-reflection, because I have to self-reflect on this. I'm just a great believer in the more the better, so to limit this to 3, I find pretty tough. So, and it gets very personal because it depends on what I think I would value most. So for me, I would probably say the Bible. Book that probably had the most influence on me in college was C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity, because I was really fascinated by the fact that somebody with no religion at all, how they came to Christianity. So that was a big one for me. And then if I do want a little bit more self-help, I'm in college and I'm getting out, if I got the values, I would say every 2 or 3 years I will reread Covey's 7 Habits, because that one is one that I take wherever I usually go. So if I had to name 3, those would be 3. I would make one suggestion. This is not a title. I'm a great believer in the wider the net, the better. So if somebody is even interested in business, I think the more things they read outside of business, the better. I'm fairly fanatical about the incredible power of a liberal arts education. So the more somebody can truly understand world civilization, history, religion, politics, science, that helps them from their life get from roots to trees to the forest, makes them a much more holistic person. So you're limiting us to 3, but I'd think about a couple hundred myself.
Joan, you run into a lot of people with all your activities, especially with the hearing speeches of the Toastmasters and so forth. From your experience, what 3 books would you recommend to the undergraduates?
Personally, the first book I'd recommend is a book that I read in high school, Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, because I think your attitude goes a long way. The second book I read about 3 years ago. I know it's been around for a while, and especially if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, I think the book by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. And the third book I read about a year ago, because that's when it was published, by John Maxwell, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. And that's especially important in the business environment because connection is key. You have to be able to connect and relate to other people, and Harry was saying it, the more people he can connect with, the more people he can communicate with, the better. So those would be my 3 choices.
Thank you. Jeff, what would you recommend?
Yeah, you know, I've got 2 that, you know, we've kind of really hashed out over the years that I think are great. Covey is the one, The 7 Habits, I think is great. And the other book is Good to Great.
Oh, yes.
Okay? And it's a terrific book. It talks about, you know, building teams and, you know, the right people on the bus at the right time in the right seat and, you know, those type of things, and how you can, you know, put teams together and, you know, take your company, your teams and of people and just, you know, really get the most out of them. And I think that's great. I learned a lot by, you know, kind of reading about Jack Welch a little bit too, which I think is also pretty powerful, and the style that he had. And not that I think all of that would work in today's business environment, but you know, how you judge the performance of people, set targets and strategies and goals for your company and attain those. I think Welch has got a pretty good perspective on that. So those would be where I would focus my attention.
Thanks. All right, students, come on. You guys have to have some questions. All right, Chelsea, what do you have to say here?
I'm curious if you have advice or thoughts on this idea of leadership, but not in the formal sense of you have people under you or on your team or you're a teacher, but more amongst your peers and with your friends and maybe even with people who are in a higher position than you, how can you be a leader with those people?
Who wants to start? Who wants to field this one? Okay, I'm gonna stick this one on Harry. What do you say?
Actually, this is turns out one of my favorite questions because, a little context, most people when they talk about leadership, they immediately think about how I lead my team, which if you're a reasonable person, you kind of get your arms around that. Then the next stage is you got to be able to deal with all your peers. And many people kind of figure that out. I think the hardest thing in life that everybody has to deal with, if they're honest, is how do you lead up? Excuse me, all the things we're talking about today, let's assume you get it, you believe it, you want to live it, but for whatever reason, your boss, he or she either doesn't get it or they don't want to get it. And in my mind, this is where leadership really, really becomes important because, and I'll just role play this thing, I report to you and I'm just making believe you just don't get it or don't want to get it, or maybe you're not a great person. Well, what is my ability, what is my God-given ability to have some influence on you? Could it be my attitude, my behavior? Way beyond words, Chelsea, can I convince you I have absolutely no personal agenda other than to do the right thing? And can I just sort of demonstrate to you why there's a better way to do things than the way you're doing them? And my view is, if I get relatively good at that, I may be able to move you and really get you in a better direction. But I always also at the end say, certain cases I can't. And I'm not a great believer in becoming Don Quixote, and if I try everything I can, and I can't get you off the dime, and it's really important, then I've either got to go to your boss or I've got to leave the organization. Because if it's a values-driven thing and I'm just going to tolerate it, I don't know what you call that, but it's not being a leader.
Well, here, Jeff, you've dealt with so many people or on all kinds of different levels. What do you have to say to that question?
I think there's all different leaders, and I think it's your point of view. I focus on in Good to Great, it talks about a level 5 leader, right? That kind of person that they walk in the room, they walk very, very quietly, they never say a word, they just sit down, but everybody in the room knows they're there. Okay, and we had a guy like that at McDonald's, and I forget exactly who I was talking about, but Fred Turner, okay, was right, Harry? Yeah. Fred Turner was our senior chairman, okay, retired many, many years ago, passed away a couple years ago, but the guy was a level 5 leader, all right? Now, when he did speak, sometimes he didn't really handle it well, all right, if he was, PO'd at something or whatever, but he understood the system, he understood the value of what we called inside our system the three-legged stool, all right? The owner-operators, the suppliers, and the company people all working together. And he really believed in that very passionately. He didn't have to talk about it a lot, but you always knew when he did speak, that was coming out, all right? He was a level 5 leader. I think leaders like what you're talking about too have instinct. And I can think of, becoming a member of our top management team in the company. And there's probably about a dozen people that have that, have kind of a seat at the table inside McDonald's. I always thought, every time I was going into one of those meetings, okay, the first thing I always thought about was, and I told myself, just keep your mouth shut until it's appropriate and you have something to contribute. Because there's a lot of people that'll sit around the table and they just want to talk. Right. Exactly. All right, but when they talk, they don't say anything, okay, or they're not really contributing, and so I think you have to have the instinct on when to get involved in the conversation and show good, solid leadership. Harry said something I thought was great. The piece he said on true confidence, and he underlined true in his comment. True confidence. There are so many people that can get up on a stage and talk and you think they're very confident. They don't know squat. Okay? They can't back it up. Okay? They don't walk the talk. Okay? And they don't deliver on the goods. And it only takes a little while for you all to figure that out. Okay? Because you can see it in the results. Okay? And then, I forget exactly who said this. At the end of the day, you have to understand whether you're leading a team, you're leading a big company, you're leading a great group of people or whatever. If you're the leader, somebody is going to have to make a decision at some point. And do you have the confidence, have you taken enough input to really take it upon yourself to really lead? And it might not be the most popular thing to do, and someone might have said you should go north, I think. And you know the right thing is to go south, and you're going to take a risk, and you're willing to take that risk. That's when I think you start to become, a true valued leader to an organization, okay? And it's like, knock all the BS out of it. At the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision. Now, whether it's a quick decision maker or whether it's somebody that gets the input from 65 people in the room, I'm never going to be the guy that takes input from 65 people in the room. That's just not my style. But those key leaders that I have in the organization, treat them with respect. They'll tell you what you need to know, make the decision, and move. And that's the kind of leader that I want to be around. So.
Joan, let's hear your insights on this.
Sure. Chelsea, leadership doesn't come from a position. Leadership doesn't come from a title. There are a lot of high-level executives who, frankly, are not leaders. Leadership is influence. So when you're trying to lead your peers, you have to have influence with them. How do you gain influence with your peers? Well, first of all, you have to spend time with them. They have to be able to trust you. And you have to listen. We talked a lot about listening earlier today. You have to listen to see what they value, not just what you value and what you want them to do. You have to see what their goals are. And then the question you should ask as a leader is, how can I add value to the others around me? And when you do that, then you will become a leader. And a good way to know if you're a leader is look behind you to see if someone is following you.
Let me ask a question here. We've talked about the positive. Just for a second, I want to talk about the negative because it's part of life too. How do you spot the difference between gold and radioactive fallout? Because they both look the same. When somebody's just starting out on a career and they're trying to figure out which way to go or which people to listen to, how can you tell which is the gold and which is the toxic radioactive fallout to avoid? Why don't we start, Jeff, with you?
That's hard. Because when you're first starting out, you're influenced by everybody. And all you're trying to do is sort through, I think, the minutia on, who really knows, what's going on and who should I follow and who are the ones that, they're going to end up being a follower too. All right, they're not really going to be the leader of the group. I think you have to, you have to have the right instinct, I think, to do that. And I think the influence as Joan just said, you watch the people that seem to be fairly influential, seem to know what they're talking about, seem to get, the whole team, kind of involved to move the business forward. And, but there really are radioactive people out there, okay, that'll take you the wrong way. And you have to be able to sort that out too. Some of it you'll hear because of their reputation. Because other people have seen it, right? And you gotta store that. You gotta bring that up every once in a while if you're going to make a decision to kind of go that way. You have to understand that maybe there's a little history there, and you should be careful with that decision and maybe consult some other people, before you decide to get on that bandwagon. Because once you do and you're committed, you're gonna move down the road that way, and so I think you have to be careful.
Well, Joan, now you've seen this a lot in your line of work, and the bad guys don't always wear black hats and pinstriped black shirts. How do you figure out who is the bad guy and who's the good guy? What are the signs you look for?
I think you look to see if people walk their talk. Because if they have certain values and they're saying that they have those values, then you want to make sure that they're acting on those values and they're not compromising, they're not saying one thing and doing another. And this is a good example. A couple years ago, I led the Toastmasters organization in the Chicagoland area, about 233 Toastmasters clubs. It's a nonprofit educational organization that helps people improve their communication and their leadership skills. Well, if you ever want to have leadership skills, then join Toastmasters and try to lead that organization, because leading volunteers is certainly different than leading paid employees. At work, I'm a supervisor. I can tell people this is what you need to do, and because I'm their supervisor, they do it. But in a volunteer organization where you're managing 5,000 volunteers, you can ask people to do something, and if they value you as a leader, if their values line up with yours and you have gained their trust, then they'll do it. Now, sometimes you have people, and this is in the work environment, it's in volunteer organizations everywhere, and I've coined a phrase, I don't know if anybody's used this before, but I always say that you have to beware of the spark vampires. Now, what's a spark vampire? Well, it's somebody who's toxic, like you said, Dan, who's always negative, who's always looking to tell you why you can't do something instead of why you can do something. So I say beware of those spark vampires and surround yourself with people that have like values.
Harry, I bet you've got some opinions on this. What do you think?
You know, I come back to what I mentioned to Robin before. As Jeff said, it's very hard when you're young and you're starting off to be able to separate this out. So the only way I know how to do it is you just create an enormous network. You find other people you're starting with, because there's not a lot of secrets as long as you know enough people. And you get to enough people, hey, what was it like working for Jeff? What was it like working for Joan? What was that like? And you start to gather, and you do it as quickly as you can, because trying to figure it out all by yourself is pretty tough to do. But I believe we live in a world, particularly nowadays, where there's very few secrets. There may have been more secrets 40, 50 years ago, but now, with all the devices and everything else, if you want to find out about somebody, and you spread a wide enough net, you'll figure it out pretty quick.
Great. Any other questions, folks? Come on. All right. Let's go with beauty before age. Here we go. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question about balance, which you had spoken about, because I work with many younger professionals who are starting in their careers, and I see that they're really willing to compromise balance in their lives because they think it's going to help them establish themselves in their career or get a raise. But then I also have seen that once they're willing to compromise in that, then it's easier to compromise in other areas. So do you have any advice of like what is an appropriate balance to have as a young working person? And if it is important to maintain that early in a career, or if that's just something you establish later on?
I'm like terrible at this, you know, and I was for a long time. I did start off that way, all right, exactly how you're describing. And it never slowed down until I took an international position, at least in my career path. And the reason it slowed down on the international position is I was so far away, they couldn't get to me. I mean,
that's true.
I mean, seriously, I was so far away that it just didn't matter, all right? And so if there was something really urgent, they could still reach me. Other than that, they handled it themselves, all right? And I think they had better work-life balance when I was far away too, all right, you know, kind of thing. But I don't pretend to tell you that I had a good work-life balance. And at the end, the last 2 years were really, really tough, okay? And I can tell you that when I finished, the best thing that happened when I actually started to decompress a little bit was I had a bit of a relief from a softball in my stomach, all right? Because you are worried about the business, and when you're the leader of the business, it's even more so. I do believe you have to have better work-life balance. My wife is much better at it than I am, okay, in terms of exercise and taking the time to try to do things the right way. And she's got a big job, okay? She's got a tough job, okay? And I don't say that she, you know, she puts in a lot of hours and that type of thing, but she does take the time. It is important to take the time to clear your head, to clear your thinking, to do the 15 minutes that Harry talked about, those type of things. But I can't honestly tell you that I did a really good job at it, because I know I didn't.
Now, Joan, you're a real Renaissance woman. You've probably got some thoughts on this. What do you think?
Well, early on in my career, I chose to work for the government because I wanted that balance that you were talking about. I actually had seen CPA firms have employees that worked 80 hours a week. That's not something that I wanted. I wanted to make a difference in my job, and I felt like I do, and I did, while working for the government. But I also knew that I wanted to have a life outside of work. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't work weekends at the very beginning. Early on in my career, I did work weekends, but that was my choice. I chose to do that because the proverbial pay the dues. You have to pay your dues to move up, to get promotions, right? So I did that, but one thing that I've noticed, and I have a little bit more flexibility now that I'm further along in my career, but one thing that I noticed is when I started my career early on, I didn't have a lot of money, so money was a little bit more important to me. And as time has gone by, it's less important, and time is more important. So that's the balance that I have now. I have extracurricular activities outside of work, and I don't know if this helps you or not, Aaron, but just think about what you want and what is important to you, and what are you willing to risk or to give up to get there.
Well, Harry, with 5 kids, this had to be a red-hot issue for you. You've probably devoted a lot of thought to it. What do you say?
Well, I think, Aaron, it's one of the things that I come back to self-reflection. And I think the earlier you guys ask yourself what really matters, what's important, and what kind of balance, what kind of life balance do you want to have, the earlier you think about it, the better. And I kind of view it as there's no right or wrong, because everybody's going to think about it differently. But I always tease, as a fellow math major, we have favorite numbers. I always tell everybody my favorite number, all-time favorite number that I usually think about a couple times a week is 168. All-time favorite number of hours in a week, right? So everybody in this room has got the same 168 hours, right? So it's 135 today. In a world of total uncertainty, if we get together in this room next Wednesday at 1:35, exactly 168 hours have gone by. Now what's fascinating is some people will be planful, and they'll say, well, my health is important to me and I'll exercise, or my children are important to me. And other people will come back here and say, oh, that's amazing. 160 hours went by. No, it's not amazing. It's just 24 times 7. There's nothing amazing about the whole process. You're either proactive and you figure out how you're going to spend your time, or you don't, right? And when Dan was asking about articles or books, one article I recommend for everybody, and I can send it to Father if you guys don't have it, is called The Corporate Athlete. And it was written by a guy named Jim Lohr. Jeff may have seen it. And what this fellow does, and he'll articulate it much better than I, but he talks about the fact that anybody involved in sports, they make sure they're exercising, they're getting sleep, they're eating correctly, and that's for a game because they're an athlete. And he said, most people that are in any kind of a position, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, but any kind of, we're not in a sprint, we're in a marathon, okay? And if we're going to be doing the things that you're going to maybe be doing for 20, 30, 40 years, you better be prepared for it. And he talks about, I believe he talks about 4 levels. He talks about the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And unless you've got your act together and have thought through these things, you are never going to make it through a marathon. That's why people we've known, phenomenal people, at 40, they're burned out, they got a heart attack, they're in a home someplace. It's a marathon. And taking the time to figure out what that is. As I always tell everybody, you're not going to get to a higher level position without the fact you're going to work hard. I just look at it as, what's the balance? What's the flexibility? How do you make sure that whatever you say is important, you are going to do? Simple example, I'll run into people and they'll say, well, one of the things I really need to do is I need to start to exercise more. I'm going to do it 3-4 times a week. Well, you run into that person 3 weeks later and say, well, are you exercising? Well, no, I haven't had time yet. Well, no, you got time. You got the same 168. It was something that you either do because you built into it and it's important, or it's not going to happen. So unless you plan for it, it won't occur, right? And then as I always say, one more opinion, and this is for the younger folks. I think whatever you're going to do, if it really is important to you, you better start early. Because if you don't start early and build it into your life early, you're not going to do it later, because as my colleague said, things are only going to get busier. There's only going to be more and more demands on you. And the tragedy I see all the time with young people is they say, well, I'm getting out of school, so for the first 4 or 5 years, I just got to bust it out. And after 4 or 5 years, and I get to that position, then I'm going to spend more time with my wife, my kids, my church, whatever. Well, there's a tragedy in all this, because when somebody says, at least the people I know, the people say I'm going to do that until they get to a certain job. Here's the issues. The first thing issue is it never got defined. What was it? Was it becoming a director? Was it becoming a vice president? What was it? That got a little nebulous. And the second thing is the only way you can spend, I believe, 80, 90 hours a week doing something is that you have to convince yourself that everything else really wasn't that important. I was going to spend time with my spouse, but I'll do that next month. Joey's, in kindergarten. I won't see his plays now. I'll see him later. Well, if you convince yourself none of those things are that important, I don't think 5 or 6 years later they're going to suddenly become important, right? And then here's the real tragedy, as my colleagues are aware, is let's say you did figure out what the position was, where you're going to turn it down, or you were able to re-engage. By the time you're ready to re-engage, at least a lot of people I've known, their spouse left 2 years ago. They didn't even know they left, okay? Or, well, that's okay because I still have the relationship with my children. But then the children say, Dad, Mom, you weren't around the first 10 years of my life. I'm not so sure I need you around now, right? And as Joan said, what are you doing and why? What's the goal here? How important is money? How important is materialism? If it's important, then at least you won't be surprised. But what really matters? And why?
It's the last question. I'm going to give it to Bob, since I rudely pulled his leg just a second ago. A short one, and then we'll have a little commercial, and then we'll end. Bob.
Well, I'm not sure that this is that short, but it seems that Wall Street's expectations are causing a lot of the bad behavior and bad ethics in business today. What can be done to allay that? Because it may only get worse as expectations increase over time.
Who wants to field that hot ball?
I think there a lot of major public companies are really worried about that too. And you've got so many people writing and commenting on so many different things that these large public companies are doing that I do think in some cases it does cause some of the ethics issues and the behavior that I think Joan was talking about, or Harry was talking about on delivering the number and that type of thing. I was fortunate. We weren't in that situation. I mean, the numbers are what they are, okay? And, I think as Harry articulated, it's like, okay, if they're not up to our expectations, then what are we going to do to make sure that doesn't occur again? And, you want to keep your company healthy and you want to do that the right way, but you have to, almost to a certain extent, turn some of that noise off, okay? And come back to, are we doing the right thing? Do we have the right plan? Do we have the right strategies in place? Are the right initiatives being deployed? Do we have the support? Have we talked to our constituency? And is our constituency in the same place that we are? Because if you listen to all that noise every day, okay, you start to run your company for the noise. You don't run your company for the core values and the core products that you bring to market, in my opinion, okay? And sometimes that approach changes with different leaders, in the marketplace. We had a CEO that was very adept at one point on dealing with Wall Street. We never even talked about it in a senior management meeting because we didn't need to, Okay? That was not our role, and he wanted us focused on what our roles was, leading our teams and doing our job. Others brought the conversation right into the senior management meetings and, you know, just made it part of our everyday work life because he felt, you know, that that was part of our education and we needed to hear that to balance how we were managing the company, okay? So it depends on the leader of the business, but if you respond to everything that an analyst or, you know, in a financial conference is questioning on or dealing with, and you're trying to make those changes, you're going to drive your people crazy, okay? Because you're going to get so far away from focusing on the key strategies that are going to help the company in the long term that it's going to be a mess. So I think you got to be honest, you got to be forthright. These are the earnings, this is the share buyback, these are the targets, and these are realistic. Here's the plan, and let's go.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Just briefly, I think that we have the problems that we have, especially in the accounting fraud scandals, because of the pressure from Wall Street. I mean, look at our scandals, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, all of those was because they wanted to meet or beat Wall Street's expectations. And a lot of that was because of the financial pressure as well. Like Jeff said, it depends on the leader. It depends on the tone at the top, and the leader at the top sets the tone for the whole organization. Now, coming from an accounting background, I can tell you that one thing that can help with that is a strong, strong system of internal controls. Because if you've got the checks and balances in the company, then that's going to take care of a lot. It won't take care of management override, but again, that's the tone at the top, and that's the leader that sets that tone.
Yeah, you know, I think my colleague summarized it well. I'll even maybe state a little bit strongly is I think all of this discussion about Wall Street pressure is really a problem only because you don't have strong leaders. If you have the kind of leaders that, you know, Jeff and his colleagues had at McDonald's, at the end of the day, these people on Wall Street, they're human beings. They're going to say, well, here's what we'd like. And you have a strong leader say, well, I know you'd like that, but this is what we're going to deliver. Right? Who's running the company? As I always used to say, the fact that you got a couple 30-year-olds with an Excel spreadsheet that have never run, led, operated anything are telling you what the numbers ought to be. If you feel pressure, I got to tell you, having been the CFO and the CEO, I never felt any pressure. Because if those guys, and that's their job, so, well, Harry, we think back, well, that's fascinating, you know, fascinating. Let me tell you what we're going to deliver. And by the way, if you like it, buy the stock. If you don't like it, sell the stock. But you've got people, and we all know them, that, oh, that's what Wall Street wants. Well, in my mind, that is a complete, total lack of leadership, number one. Number two, a little bit of a finance comment. Okay, I can't help myself, okay? Everybody talks about Wall Street, those Wall Street. We ask ourselves, well, who is Wall Street? Wall Street doesn't have any money other than the money we all give them through pension funds, savings plans, everything else. So I used to tease the people at Baxter because you have to have a sense of humor. I'd get together with like 600 or 700 of my guys in the cafeteria and they'd say, well, Harry, why do these guys feel so much pressure? I said, why do they feel pressure? Let me tell you what happens. You all, the 700 of you, get your 401k on a quarterly basis. You don't understand why it went down that quarter. You call somebody, they call somebody, it ends up being somebody in New York. So it's like, we found the enemy, it is us, okay? It's all of us. I mean, Wall Street has no money. So it's fascinating to me that we blame these people, that's us. You gotta have a sense of humor.
Well, thanks very much. I want to say I really got a lot out of this program today, and I was really privileged to be hosting quality people like this. And I'll turn it over to Father Bill for closing.
Yeah, just before we give a final hand to the panel, one thanks to Dan, our MC from Relevant Radio, who did a great job of guiding us through the conversation. I just want to thank our front office. Christine Rembles in black and blue there runs the business ethics programming here at Integritas. So we want to thank her very much for her efforts to organize this. And then Anya, Sam, and Barb are the rest of the front office team there. So it takes a lot of people to pull this off. Thanks to our focus missionaries who've been very, very helpful here today too. Our next event is Gretchen Winters, who's an ethicist coming up from Champaign-Urbana on the 9th of next month, and we'll get the information to you through email. Another hand to our panelists. Thank you so much. And I'm sure they'll be available for some questions for a few moments afterwards. Thank you, everybody.